Going on. That's great. So I am so delighted on Saturday afternoon. I know that this is a time when it's hard to come to learn and listen, but because there are a substantial number, I don't know if it was 50%, but when James asked us to stand representing scholars or academics, faculty members, practitioners, students, and so on, there were, it looked like 50% people interested in practice, application, and so on of positive psychology principles. Maybe the best example I know of a person who has applied and practiced positive organization, scholarship, positive psychology, positive leadership, is a person you're going to hear today, John Kim. So I'd like to introduce John in 2 or 3 ways. But first of all, John's a friend and has been for quite a long time. He's also a University of Michigan graduate, which makes him really smart and really well prepared. But John is especially eager to have you ask questions and interact. So I'm going to suggest that starting now, you think about questions you want to ask or things you want to discuss related to application of these principles in a very difficult place, and that is financial organizations. John is the president of the largest mutual insurance company in the world. He's become famous in that industry primarily because he is such a good investment officer. Every organization that he's touched from 30 years ago has exceeded by a dramatic proportion of expectations the goals that have been set. John is a magician. So if you have a lot of money and you want to invest it, ask John. He'll probably make money for you. But on this slide, I've got 3 or 4 things that I want to tell you about very briefly. I got to know John, and he'll tell you about this. I got to know John when he was the CEO of an organization called Prudential Retirement. Now, at the time, Prudential Retirement and Cigna Retirement were both relatively minor units in their respective organizations. And they decided that they were going to merge. They didn't decide, but they merged together. Now, that's been described as merging the Yankees and the Red Sox. One's a New York-based firm, one's a Boston-based firm, sort of, at least close to that, Connecticut. And enemies, competitors, people with different cultures. But John was put in charge of not only making that work, but then crafting that organization into something that would become successful, and he turned it into being something that was extraordinary, the biggest unit within those organizations. And so I had a chance to work with John and be close to him and watch him in operation as he was leading that organization. He moved from Prudential Retirement to New York Life, rapidly moved up the hierarchy until he's the number 2 person in charge. And so essentially the number 2 investment officer, the number 2 leader in the world in the field of mutual insurance. So because all of us, or many of us, are interested in, well, how do you actually do this outside the lab, outside even students doing experiments, but how do you do it in a place where fundamentally the bottom line is, show me the money? I mean, I got one goal, and that is I want to make money. And this doesn't seem like the thing you would use to make money, but John is spectacular and an engaging, gracious person, and I'm so grateful that he's flown down from New York today. So, John Kim.
Thank you very much, Kim Cameron. You notice this Kim mentioned my name is John Kim, and the slide here says John Kimot. I've never seen that before. It is a typo of sorts here. Many of you know, probably would guess my ethnic heritage here. So I've been called John Lee before, John Park before, but never not John Kimot here. So that was very creative, so I actually took a picture of that to show my family and friends. There was another typo, actually. Joe, the session handler, introduced me about an hour ago and called me Dr. Kim because in your program it says Ph.D. I do not have a Ph.D. Now, I know most of the other speakers have a Ph.D. I do not. Kim would know this since I did my BBA at Michigan in the business school. I was barely a B student, Kim, as you probably would have guessed here. But I'm very honored to be called Dr. Kim, at least in error by somebody. This also, I'm a little hesitant to even describe my story to you because without giving much thought, when Kim asked me to do this about 6-7 months ago, he asked for a title, and again, without much thought, I suggested, well, why don't we say positive organizational scholarship, a professional and personal journey. And so as I was preparing for this over the past week or two, I was thinking, well, the professional journey is a fairly easy journey for me to describe and not very risky because a lot of things that we do in the work environment we can describe in a less intimate, less personal sense by definition, but the personal journey aspect was going to force me to describe to you how this actually connected. And so I feel a little vulnerable, I must tell you, but because I committed to one Kim Cameron that I was going to describe POS both from a professional and personal journey perspective, you actually get to hear this. And I am, again, a little hesitant to describe this to you, but it is absolutely genuine, it is absolutely authentic, and from my perspective, as you will hear from not only my comments, but some of the examples that I give to you, that positive psychology, positive organizational scholarship, is not sort of one stream of activities that you can basically bifurcate in one part of your life and not have it impact the other part of your life. And I already see a few nods here, which suggests to me I'm probably on the right track here. So, a bit of a personal background, because if I'm going to describe personal and professional journey, I have to give you both my professional credentials here, which Kim largely gave, but also my personal credentials. And my personal credentials, as likely your personal credentials, do not begin and end with John Kim or John Kimot. It actually begins with how the Kim family baton was passed. And I won't go back multiple generations, but as some of you may be aware, the Korean heritage is very rich in its history, number one, but it's also very homogeneous. So I can basically say categorically, because I've actually done some gene testings to suggest that I'm 100% Asian, which would not have been a surprise to me, but my family lineage actually goes back 5,000 years. We could actually go back to even the southern part of South Korea. My father, who is 80 today and is happily retired in Northern Virginia, was the first in his family, firstborn, number one. He was the first in his family to go to college. He came from a long lineage of farmers, which is a very honorable profession in most countries and certainly in Korea when he was born in 1935. But to the great sort of frustration and I would say anger of my grandfather, he said, I'm going to college and I want to study divinity, actually. And we came from a very humble beginnings here. This was not a land baron my grandfather was. We had a tiny plot in the southern part of South Korea. So he was the first to go to college, and he came to the United States on a full scholarship because obviously he couldn't afford it. And he actually rose to the ranks to indeed be the doctor that he is here, a Ph.D., and you could call him, Joe, Dr. Kim, if he were here. And he was so successful from many perspectives because he came from really the lowest of third world status, in my mind, to have achieved the highest in terms of first world status. He got his PhD. He basically raised the 3 kids here for me and my 2 younger sisters to go to fine universities like University of Michigan. He actually went back to Korea to be a professor and then retired as a president of his college. I say that because I often wonder, and there are enough academicians and researchers in this room where you may have an answer to this. I don't know the answer myself, is how much of your orientation and your positive inclination is a learned behavior versus the innate sort of behavior or that you get from your parents from a biological perspective. Said another way, how much is it nature versus nurture, that debate that we often discuss here when it comes to intelligence quotients here. So that was sort of the baton that I was passed. And so I feel like in so many respects here, my life and my career has been actually a fraction of what my father's life and his career was. And as a result, when I have achieved levels of success and stature, it never occurred to me that I should gloat about that because I had followed somebody who, in my mind, was so much greater than I could ever become. And so that is one part of my personal background. A bit about my professional background too, and then we'll obviously get into how the positive organizational scholarship, and positive psychology has had a transformational impact, at least in my career and then in my personal life, is I basically, as Kim described, joined the old Aetna organization, which is now part of ING, and they just renamed themselves Voya. ING is a Dutch concern back in basically about 32 years ago, back in 1983. And then I rose through the ranks in a very traditional fashion with some good fortune, some hard work, and some modest success to be at fairly senior levels fairly early in my career. In 2002, I was recruited basically to lead the investment and retirement business of Cigna organization. Cigna, for most of you, is a healthcare company today. But back in 2002, they were both a healthcare company and a fairly significant retirement services company. And when I say retirement services, it's a 401k business. Do you all know the 401k business, or 403b if you're in the university setting? Which is very important to you, right? Because you want to retire securely, and so you give money to companies like Cigna back in 2002, New York Life today, or even from 2002 to 2004 under the Prudential Retirement Organization. And so I was basically in charge of that unit in 2002, very happy. How old was I? I was 42 at that time, and very happy and doing very well. And then we had a bit of a problem in Cigna's healthcare business because they had some major technology initiatives that did not go well. As a result, they suffered some financial duress, and they decided to sell the company in early to mid-2003. During that time, as you can imagine, I was leading a large organization, and it was publicly declared that we were going to sell the company, as I was going to be part of the sales process. That was probably one of the toughest moments in my professional career, where I had to manage an organization of approximately 1,200 individuals that they didn't know whether all of them, including myself, was going to lose our jobs. And it happened, obviously, that, as Kim described, that Prudential Insurance at that time was good enough to actually buy the Cigna Retirement Organization, and further, obviously in retrospect, was good enough to put me in charge of the combined organization. The statistics, if you go back you can Google this fairly easily, back in the 2003-2004 timeframe, was that the two companies, which were about middling companies, were in combined, and you'll be impressed by these numbers, but they're really not impressive. They're actually about, mid-sized companies that we combined to have about 120 billion of assets under management. So we would have managed about 120 billion of 401k, 403b, some defined benefit money. We had about 2,400 employees, and at that time, Prudential Financial, which I think many of you know, The Rock, get a piece of The Rock, and they're really a leader today in the retirement business. This was the largest acquisition in the 150-plus year history of Prudential Financial at that time, at $2.1 billion that they paid to acquire the Cigna retirement and investment business. One of the challenges that they gave me as the leader of the combined organization in the spring, actually, April of 2004 was, John, you did a great job at Cigna. We bought you, and now you get to merge the two organizations together, as Kim Cameron described, have the Yankees and the Red Sox get along, the Hatfields and the McCoys, and the cultures were quite different, actually. And so while we might be exaggerating a bit, Kim, probably not that much, very different cultures, different orientations. And in the process, we'd like you to take 25% out of your expense budget. Does anybody know what 25% means? About 80% of the total expenses are people. So, which is to say that proportionally we had to take out about, or reduce the head count by about 500 people or so during that merger process. Anyone want to volunteer to have done that back in 2004? No one volunteers to do that. We're all human beings. We all know individuals and people very well, and the thought of eliminating the head count was just extraordinary. It was a very painful, both physical set of activities, emotional activities, let alone sort of organizational set of activities. So that was about mid to the end of 2004. Towards the end of 2004, and I put this in the context of if you do good, sometimes good will come your way. And Kim Cameron, I don't remember when I joined the University of Michigan's Business School's Board of Visitors, but it was around that 2002, 2003 timeframe. And at one of the meetings at the end of 2004 or early 2005, the then dean of the Michigan Business School, Bob Dolan, had suggested that the Board of Visitors, who would be basically alums and of stature, who could help advise the dean, but the real code underneath that was who could also donate money to the university. We know the drill that very well. Was suggested that there would be a presentation to these business leaders and executives about positive organizational scholarship. The minute that I heard that speech, the description of POS, I said, this is a godsend. This is manna from heaven. We have to find out more about this and actively pursue this. So I went back to Hartford, Connecticut from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I told the head of HR immediately, perhaps the next day when I arrived, I said, Helen, we need to investigate this because this is something that could be very, very instrumental in making the merger of two mid-sized companies very successful. She and the head of leadership development, as you remember, Kim, back then, a woman named Sandy Brooks, both went out to Michigan, spent a few days, actually, I believe, at one of your sessions, Kim, and really got immersed in the concept of POS. This, mind you, was 10 years ago now from today. And we also know, or you should know, that mergers and acquisitions, when you do acquisitions and you combine companies, do you know what percentage of time they actually succeed? Corporate CEOs like I could stand in front of you and say, well, we're going to be very successful. Less than a quarter of acquisitions, M&A activities, actually do succeed. And we've got empirical evidence to suggest that they actually do not add value to shareholders. They certainly do not help employees and the like. So I knew that the odds were against us, that we would not likely be successful, or in order for us to be successful, we had to do extraordinary things. It was also an industry that is subject, the whole retirement industry was subject to a lot of regulation. Again, this is probably new information, but the context here is extremely important, that retirement plans, whether it's a 403B plan or a 401K plan or defined benefit, they're regulated under the Department of Labor as almost a fiduciary standard. Well, you may not have a full appreciation of fiduciary standard, but just think of fiduciary standard as if you do not act in the best interest of the plan, the pension plan, you go to jail. So those are very high standards here. And there was even greater standards being imposed in the mid-2000 time period. The last was making it even more difficult was we had major industry consolidations as the consolidation I just described to you. And so as a result, there was more price pressure coming about. So what did we do? We basically decided that we were going to hire one Kim Cameron, one Bob Quinn, and other very excellent professors and really practitioners of positive organizational scholarship to work with the senior leadership team of the Prudential Retirement Organization. And in total, when I said senior leadership team, it was not my direct reports. We had upwards of 100 people in multi-day sessions. Kim, I don't remember the exact count here, but it's probably you and your staff probably spent upwards of 30 days with us over the course of the 2-year period that we engaged. And we did virtually all aspects of positive organizational scholarship. And by example, what I would describe to you would be we established our Everest goals. Now, this is in the context of trying to take out 25% expenses in an industry that was maturing and consolidating, that we had stock analysts monitoring our activities based quarter by quarter, and we were actually thinking about what our Everest goals were going to be. In 2005, we had this bold and audacious goal of trying to get from less than 2 million clients or participants to 10 million by 2010. 10 by 10. 10 million clients by 2010. And I cannot tell you that when you put out a goal like that, that is not about making money, that is not about making money for yourself or getting the next promotion or engaging in what the reduction needs to be in terms of expenses, these financial goals here that drop to shareholders' bottom line or enhance an employee or enhance the head of the organization, but rather thinks about the end customer in mind, this Everest goal by 10 million by 2010. It was almost an uplifting, it was almost a spiritual experience that we had when we went through that exercise. Also think about this here, because you all are experts in this. Reflected best self. How is it when you know that some of your peers could be laid off or asked to do other things, that senior leadership would actually ask each other to think about what are the best things that you do, put it on a sheet of paper, remember it, share it with your loved ones, and go through that exercise here. This would have been the entirety of the 100 top leaders within the organization. Positive Energy Network. Some of you familiar with Positive Energy Network? We actually went through the entire exercise and determined that what areas that we needed to focus in on to make that area even better in terms of its performance, in terms of its attitude. These are examples. And last but not least, we really utilize, and Kim, you spent a lot of time with us on the whole competing values framework, where you not only got to profile yourself, as you all know, and color code yourself, but actually engage and have an appreciation for the differences that we have as an organization. To this day, many of us who were part of that organization 10 years fast forward, we don't refer to ourselves as what we did in 2005 or 2006. We say, yellow. Yes, I was a green, I'm still a green, and you're a blue and red and the like here. That's the type of permanence that we experience during that 2.5-year period when Kim Cameron and others helped us go through all of these activities that were really life-changing in many respects. I will take 2 credits for the success, and then I'm going to give you the fast forward of actually what happened post the merger activities. One is that I had the luck or the conviction that this is something that we needed to do at the highest level within the organization to increase the probability of success from the 25% success rate to something much higher than that. But then even during the process of going through POS, and Kim, and you might have been there when I made this declaration. I know in our little review that we did in the case study, it was noted that I declared that because there was some concern amongst the leadership of whether POS was going to actually help us out or whether this was one of these feel-good initiatives that was just going to pass as the leadership passed and the like. I made a declaration at that time, quote, "This is the direction we are going, and this is the culture to which we are transforming. You need to think deeply about whether you believe in this vision. If you do, then get on the bus. If you don't, then this may not be the place for you." Now, when you're a leader of then 2,400 people, and you make a declaration like that, one of the larger concerns is, well, what if like a lot of the senior people don't want to go on the bus with you and they check out? So there's a vulnerability that is created. Thankfully, the vast majority, if not the virtual entirety of the organization signed on to this. It was a corporate version of almost a religious commitment that one makes, that we're going to sign on to this, all for one for all, and we continue to move forward. After the integration was completed, I moved on to my next life, corporate life, which is the New York Life organization. But I want to now give you like what has happened, because one of the most gratifying things, you all talk about gratitude in so many respects, right? You know what the most gratifying thing about the Prudential retirement experience is? It was actually not the fact that we went from 2003, late 2003, to when I left the combined organization in late 2007. It's actually what happened after 2007 to where it is today. You've heard the statement, the shadow of a leader, especially in the corporate world, is very long. Now, it's a different definition for different people. In my mind, in a position like mine, it's almost never what you do while you're there. You have to fast forward it 5-10 years, and you may feel that in your line of work also, whether it's a university setting, the like. Today, just remember, back in 2004, it was less than 2 million customers with 120 billion in assets. Today, Prudential Retirement is a leader in the retirement business with not 120 billion of assets, but 364 billion. So they've more than tripled their assets, and they have over 4 million clients. They didn't reach their Everest goals, but there's a reason why they call it Everest goals, right? You don't have to get to the top. It's an aspiration. It's a mindset. for them to have actually more than double the number of customers and then more than triple the number of assets, the amount of assets, it's just extraordinary. That is something that I'm extremely proud of, that I had a small part in achieving. That is not something that I'm very firmly committed to this statement that I believe we would have accomplished here had it not been positive organizational scholarship. So for that, Kim, we have you and Bob Quinn and others to thank for. So what does John Kim do after that? He joins New York Life, April of 2008. Do you remember what happened in 2008 towards the end? Even positive psychology people know this, right? We had something called the Great Recession, the financial crisis of 2008. We were this close, actually, to losing it all. During the fall of 2008, I would tell you that every day from October, November, December, during the fourth quarter, I was physically tired. My neck hurt. I actually had to rest for about 15 minutes because I couldn't stand up anymore. That's how stressful it was. And if it wasn't for the sequence of events that occurred, especially with the things that our government did and our Federal Reserve, we actually could be in the middle of the Great Depression too. So that was my sort of memory of all of that, and I hope you would give me some credit for having that intimate view, because I was the head of a very large asset management organization back then. And what caused John Kim, as a leader of then that organization, also to come out of the Great Recession and actually prevail and prosper would be at the core POS, positive psychology. We began to apply it immediately during not only going into the crisis, but coming out of the crisis. In 2009, when most financial institutions were basically looking to just survive for another year, we actually developed our own Everest goal. And that Everest goal for New York Life Investments at that time was, quote, to be the most respected and admired investment company in America. Just imagine that goal. In fact, I mentioned that goal to the New York Life Board of Directors in 2009, and one of the board members are generally very polite people, they said, John, and he was a lawyer actually by training, he said, I appreciate and applaud that statement, but to be the most respected and the most admired, is that something that you can achieve? And I actually mentioned to him is that is an aspiration. We may never get there, but that's something that I believe that the organization can rally around. We had to reduce expenses in 2009, not because we did an acquisition or a merger of two equals, but because of the financial crisis and the necessity to reduce expenses. And we put into place the delivering negative feedback in a positive way to its very scientific way. And without that, I'm certain that we will have lost many, many good people. We also, at that time, which was a very difficult time period, as you could remember, is created our own positive energy networks and applied that in a very systematic fashion. Fast forward from 2008 to now 2014, and now you think about this in the context of the Prudential retirement experience here. Now you've got the New York Life experience. Our assets have more than doubled. The third-party assets, which would be actually one of the areas of focus, was the area of focus, we actually tripled. In 2009, we actually had no earnings in our non-insurance businesses, the third-party businesses, and we grew that from basically break-even to last year on a pre-tax basis, $350 million. So when people tell me in sessions like this, or when they hear about snippets of POS or positive psychology, again, it's in the realm of academics here or psychiatrists and psychologists. It's a feel-good, don't believe any of that. Business is always about bottom line. I can tell you that I not only have one proof statement, I've got two proof statements on why this is successful. Kim knows this also, but the other benefit that we've actually seen from this is that we've created this network here of executives who have gone on to do other things within our company and other companies that have applied POS. One that comes to mind is Jim Malazzi, who was a senior executive in my organization back in 2004 and 5. He went on to actually lead the Prudential Realty business. You know the residential realty business of Prudential? They actually sold it to Berkshire Hathaway a couple years ago. He actually applied POS techniques at Prudential Realty to great success here. So these are examples that I would describe to you quite humbly are actions that have been put into practice not in small organizations, but in very large organizations, not in situations that were easy to manage in a steady state, but really were in crisis situations where the rubber really met the road, and we applied them, and we applied them successfully. So the question that you would probably ask, or any layperson would ask outside of this room, is, could you have achieved those successes without POS or positive psychology? One really never knows, right? But I firmly believe that positive psychological techniques here materially increases the probability of success of not only going through businesses that are going in transition or in crisis, but even great businesses, you could take it to even greater states. So this is a testimonial on the professional side that I can provide to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that. Okay, personal side. So I'm actually taking out my iPhone for a reason. So the personal journey for me here, again, would be about 10 years. 2005 to 2015, you probably, if you noted when I graduated and the like, 2005 to 2015 was actually a really important period in my personal life, because that's basically when I went from being 45 to 55. 45 to 55, I guess all decades are important, but 45 to 55 was important for me because my children went from 15, 14, and 9 to 25, 24, and 19. And I'm looking around the room. I'm sure there are a number of you who are similar age to me who have children who were at that age. And so 14 and 15, just imagine what terrors they were when they were going through their teenage years, now to their full adulthood. My marriage actually went from 21 years to 31 years, which I take a lot of pride in. But we also know that, there's no perfect marriage, and we had strains in our marriage from that, mid-40s to today, mid-50s. It's something that we continue to work on. But I believe that POS, in my heart, the experience that I gained from learning the techniques during that 10-year period has made me a better husband, a better father, a better brother, since I have 2 younger sisters, and a better son. And I was thinking, what would be the proof statement to convince you that it's true? And I was struggling on that because I could tell you stories, but it would be less sort of impactful, right? So on my flight down, I emailed my daughter, and I'm going to read that email to you, and you get a sense of this. Emily's her name. I'm going to go down to the bottom of this. She wrote me a note for Father's Day. The card was so special, I had to put it down and then hide it somewhere because I was so touched by it. And then I couldn't find where I hid it, okay? This is what happens, okay. All right, so, and Kim, I'm going to forward this to you because I owe you a lot, okay? All right, so this is time-stamped 10:46 today. Hi, Em. This is an odd request. I'm giving a speech to a bunch of academics today in Orlando. I'm sorry, that's what I called you, okay? 3:30 to be exact. If you can remember, can you tell me what you wrote on the nice Father's Day card? Question mark. Reference to being satisfied / happy. I left the card at home. Thanks, Dad. Emily responds, Hi, Dad. It was about how one's happiness, especially in relation to one's success, is about appreciating the things / people around you and sharing that success in a rewarding way. The idea being that you taught me that keeping things in perspective is important because it makes you a better person and allows you to have a genuine appreciation for the fruits of your success. All in the spirit of, quote, money doesn't buy happiness, unquote, but that it is in every person's power to drive towards that happiness. Hope that makes sense. I think was clear when I wrote it first time. Emily, that's... I'm a very powerful and busy man. This is a Donald Trump quote here. I was actually thinking, I'm not sure whether this is a good use of my time to be flying down to Orlando. I can guarantee you this made it all that special. It made it worthwhile 100 times over. To which the postscript to this was, I sent a note back saying, super fantastic. And then she responded, haha, that was a really dorky reply. So, you are experts in this field. I'm just a lay practitioner. But I was thinking, not so much from the academic perspective, but from a personal perspective and from a reasonably successful business leader, what takeaways or key points that I could share with you that you might want to note. You probably would agree with most of these takeaways, and they would be as follows here. 1, this is a journey, not a destination. Like most important and difficult activities, it requires constant attention. I did martial arts when I was younger, and for those of you who've done martial arts, even after you get to a black belt status, you just continue on. You know, the first black belt, first dan, second dan, they call it degrees in America, right? There's no ending to this. It's a journey. You can never get to a state of perfection. And I believe that the application of positive psychology, positive organizational scholarship, is a journey, not a destination. 2, from success to significance. I'm not sure whether John Maxwell coined that term or it was somebody else, but being successful, I can tell you, by the external standards here, not my standards, where I'm highly successful, I can tell you categorically is one of the most unfulfilling things that I've personally felt. In fact, at age 40, I actually made enough money where I did not need to work, and that was one of the worst times in my life because at age 40, I said to myself, is this it? And so then I really committed at that time to making myself and making the situation around me to be a better situation. Significance is really, I think, the most important, whether it's the self-actualization aspect of it. And I love the statement here. It's not whether you're successful, it's whether you're significant to one or many individual or people. 3, negative deviance is illusory. Positive deviance always prevails. This whole notion of positive deviance in the categories of vitality and flow and generosity and excellence and being extraordinary, being benevolent, honoring, flourishing. Business ethics. I know many of you are not in for-profit businesses like what I've done for the last 32 years, but people talk about, are business people ethical or unethical, right? I can tell you that ethics is not binary. It is, which is maybe a surprise to you, but at least in the business context here, there are clearly unethical people, but the vast majority are quite ethical people. But even in the context of definition of ethics, there are a little cheating that goes on. Would be, I guess, our childhood version of little white lies, right? Accountants call it the de minimis rule. If something is de minimis, where it doesn't have a material impact on the accounting statements, it's okay to do. Business people do that all the time. So when you even think about positive deviance to being neutral to negative deviance, and in some of Kim Cameron and others' writings, they'll tell you that negative deviance is being unethical, which we know, but even being neutral is just being ethical, right? But being benevolent is really the positive deviance. And you really have to work at that as a business person. So this positive deviance in the context of a journey as opposed to a destination is so important. Fourth, and I'm certain all of you would agree, is that you can't have two sets of books here. Your professional life and your personal life, just unless you're one of the great, you have to be a genius, right? To actually mentally behave one way at work and then behave differently at home and vice versa. We're not smart enough to do that. So your personal and professional activities are one and the same. And if you feel like you need to do more for your family and your loved ones on the personal side, then why is it that you don't want to do the same for the organization? Because you have to do that yourself here. So one and the same. And last but not least, something that I've been thinking about perhaps as I've been getting older in my age, and especially as the world has evolved the last 10 years, maybe not in the wrong way. The world today needs positive psychology more than ever. Do you know that next year sometime, the top 1% in the world will own more wealth than the remaining 99%? Next year sometime, the 1% of the world's population will own more than the 99% underneath them. We need a world whose leaders are trying to buck this trend. We need a world whose wealthy show generosity to buck this trend. We need to pay it forward as thought leaders and financial leaders. Those are the 5 sort of takeaways as I was thinking about the talk with you that I'd like to leave you with, and hopefully one or all of those would resonate. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you, and thank you for what all of you do. Thank you. Thank you. Kim, we have a few minutes left. I'd be happy to take any questions from the audience.
And if you'd come to microphones, it will it's hard to hear across the room. Thanks.
Right. Sarah Lewis from the UK. I was particularly struck by the fact that you recognize the relevance of this to a time of difficulty. I have conversations where people say, okay, after we've done the difficult thing, then we'll do the nice stuff. So my question is, what did you hear in that first session with Kim that made it so crystal clear to you that this was relevant now?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question because that is the conventional wisdom, but the paradox, obviously, as we know, is the opposite. I'm trying to think, Kim, what triggered the thought. I think it was because, and I actually didn't make this quote, but let me read this quote to you, and I think it will bring it into to light. I actually made this quote in an interview of a publication in my field called Pension and Investments, which is a very, very logical name for a publication for investment and pension people, right? And in the quote, I said that why M&A deals do not work well, only a quarter actually are successful. And I observed, because I've been part of M&As in my prior life, my career, quote, the same themes emerge through different deals. You have to focus on both the hard and soft facets of conversion. The hard facets comprise all the systems challenges to get the plan sponsor menus aligned, to keep things moving, to give sponsors uninterrupted service and the like. The soft ones are trickier. They involve the cultural aspects, including how to communicate to clients and to your employees and how to service your plans. And so if you actually read, and I'm sure a number of you have read this here, when you do M&A, actually, again, the financial or the technology, the operational aspects are relatively easy because we generally have similar systems, and so we learn from one's mistakes. Managing people through activities is extraordinarily hard. So I would say that because I knew this and because I felt so vulnerable during that second half of 2004 time period, that when I heard the themes here of how to lift up the organization, bring the culture together, and even engage in difficult conversations and make difficult decisions in a positive way, that was a trigger mechanism for me because I was so desperate, probably. Because I knew that most M&A deals, mergers, failed because of the cultural side, the insensitivity to the people and the culture. So, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really, really enjoyed it, and especially the takeaways as well, but the whole presentation.
Thank you.
So I have a specific question around how you went about and deliberately created the Positive Energy Network. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, but I have a broader question that's connected to that, which is how you went about conveying what language you used with your leadership team to ask them to do the Positive Energy Network or any of these other things. Did you create it? Did you use specific words, and did you offer a business case?
Sure. So if I don't answer both the way you would like, let me know. Sure. So the Positive Energy Networks it's a fairly formulaic or objective method. In fact, I believe Wayne Baker, who's still at Michigan, yes, came to Hartford to help us out, which is to, in essence, be within units, clusters of units, asking the very basic questions of, when you spend an hour or meet with an individual, do you feel energized after that meeting? So we were able to systematically, plot out where the positive networks existed, which units needed to be enhanced in terms of its the positive energy, and try to root out areas that needed to be rehabilitated. So it was actually a fairly objective exercise. Your second part is, again, a great question, is that I'm certain we use words, and it took a lot of work on our part to actually, understand and fully appreciate those words. As I'm even thinking about how to answer your question, I remember, without even specifics, but a session that Bob Quinn, Kim, led on deep change. And it was, you all know, did Bob speak today? Or he has, and many of you know Bob, he's sort of the dean of this field. And he had that sort of a, ministerial quality about him. And for me, and I'm sure a number of others who were part of that, it was almost an emotional connection that we got to not only the words that he suggested, but the way he conveyed that message that connected with us. But I'm sure there were a lot of words that we use that can be applied in other corporate change settings here. But the other part that's probably the most important, and one of the things you would think that smart corporate leaders would apply this more consistently, this age-old statement of walking the talk, I think, is probably the most important. That we often, from our high horses, often say, we need to do this, I'm going to do this, we're going to go there. But more often than not, a lot of the leadership do not actually follow even what they say. And what was key here is that, and Cameron would remember this well, we actually, most of the activities actually started right at the top. It was me and my senior leadership team. And there is something wonderful about large organizations and hierarchical organizations. All corporations are, by definition, have some form of hierarchy. They look to the top, they hear what is said, but much more importantly, they actually see what is being done and how it's actually being. And I think that was probably the major catalyst, if you will, is that after a year or two, the rank and file within the organization said, I don't think this is going to be the program de jour. I think they actually believe this stuff. Unbelievable, huh? Because they're actually applying it. So it's really the tone at the top, but the actions at the top that were most impactful. Thank you. Yes?
Thanks, John. Duncan Young. I work for a company called Lendlease in Sydney. Tom Rath this morning mentioned that focus and attention was probably the number one thing that we need to focus on in the future. And you mentioned that 80% of the cost of a company today is actually labour, but human capital isn't always our focus. What would you say if you were CEO today, the number one thing that you'd focus on for well-being or positive well-being of staff?
The number one thing as I lead my current organization, well, I'd have to give you like 10 things, but I'll put it into like 10 subsets of the number one thing. How is that?
10's good.
There's so many things that leaders need to focus in on today, but it's all going to get to why positive psychology is so important. You know, the whole technological wave right now that we're experiencing is mind-boggling. If you want a good read here, read The Second Machine Age. Anyone read The Second Machine Age? You have. Good, sir. It is just fantastic, and we'll just leave you with the impression that we're just beginning here of how technology is transforming everything that we do. The whole globalization aspects, the whole wealth dispersion aspects. In the U.S., I think we have something that a lot of us, this is a younger crowd, or there's some young people, especially the students here, you would appreciate this, but we are missing something, and it is that the baby boomers who are generally controlling America today, you know, in positions of power, right? Their children, the millennials, they're entirely different than we are. And I would submit to you that that is going to have a transformative effect here in the U.S. economy and society that we are not fully appreciating. This is a generation, I grew up in the generation where it was a winner-take-all mentality. You know, my parents used to tell me if I finished first, how, you know, badly did you beat the second place person by, right? Our kids, you know, we've got stacks and stacks of trophies for fifth place finishes in soccer and field hockey and the like. You know, they basically, Emily is in that category, my 25-year-old there. They think that they're God's gift to the world, and they're behaving that way. But there's actually a really good quality, I would say, about the millennial generation. And so I think if you sort of boil all those statements to the essence of your question, which is a great one, is really to have a much deeper understanding about the individual and the organization and the groups that you are influencing and leading, and to get to the essence of what motivates and drives them, to have them achieve their peak performance so the organization can achieve. So positive psychology was important even before we even had positive psychology 50 years ago. Many of us probably practiced it 50 years ago more as from a gut perspective. Now you've got the body of science around this here. I think this is going to be even more important in the next 50 years, given all these transformative things that are going on in the world today. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your words today. I am most appreciative for Emily's note. So if it made worth for you coming here, it made it worth for me coming here too. Convey my gratitude to your daughter.
Thank you.
As you were riding the bus and the people got with you on the bus, what signals did you look at to know that you were on the right direction or you needed to take a corrective maneuver? I imagine that launching the invitation to embrace POS was taken with some variation by your manager. Some of them embrace it fully, and some of them will more reluctant to that. Not only your managers, the people they led to will have some degrees of acceptance to that invitation.
Yes.
So what were the signals that you were paying attention to? What was the feedback mechanism?
From the past or going forward?
Going forward.
Going forward,
in the journey.
yes, yes. The signals are very clear from my perspective, and it's both a positive and a negative. I think that especially in large organizations, and my current responsibility is quite significant. I've got 20,000 people, within the organization, and we manage over 500 billion of assets. So I don't take the responsibility lightly, and I basically take the tails, and because I can't obviously focus my energies on the entirety of the organization. So the influence points are small, but they're very impactful is the best way I would describe it, is you have to root out the negative deviant behavior. And so while we talk about positive psychology, those who actually do not apply it and who are actually negative deviants, if you will, you actually have to root them out, and you have to do it in a very systematic and decisive fashion. So that would be one area. But then the other part is obviously this, on the other side of the spectrum, is you have to richly reward the contributors, the leaders who are the positive deviants, giving them more responsibility, more compensation, more public recognition, so the organization can see, aha, the top of the organization is not only saying this, but he's making these decisions that can be very difficult decisions when you let somebody go. That actually has a very, very big impact on organizations. And obviously, the larger the organization, the more impactful that would be. Okay. Kim, can we take a couple more questions, or one, two more? Okay, those two. Okay, great. Yes.
Thanks for the great sharing. Very inspiring. And this
Thank you.
is from Hong Kong. You are leading such a big organization. What are the 2 or 3 secrets or challenges which you you have encountered when cascading this positivity to the organization? Because it's too large, and not everybody will perform the same. So yeah, thank you.
There are so many there, but if I could just, off the top of my head, I would say that, and I truly believe this, not for this crowd here, is that being positive and optimistic is very contagious, and it has a magnified effect, if you will. We talk about the long shadow of a leader. It has a magnified effect. If you have had a bad day, and it shows at the top of the organization, many parts of the organization feel bad about that. So that actually is a big burden that I carry, is that I want to be on and be positive as much as possible, because it's not about me, it's about the larger organization that I think about. Second is that I think that business leaders underestimate the whole notion of being authentic. And authenticity is something that it is remarkable to me how people at the lowest levels in the organization pick up almost immediately, within probably a minute or two. And I still find it surprising that people in very high positions think they could say something or do something and they can get away with that. You cannot get away with that. And probably an important subset of that is part of being authentic, actually, is showing your vulnerabilities. And I think that the paradox of this is that when you actually show vulnerabilities as a leader, it actually creates strength. You're perceived as a stronger person than not. And so it's one of these paradoxical statements here. So those are the 2 things that I think about here, but many others, but just off the top of my head there. Okay?
Thank you.
One last question.
Hello, John. I'm Jane Dutton. I'm one of the people at
Hello,
Michigan.
Jane. How are you?
Yeah,
Nice
great
to see you.
Thank you for your continuing inspiration.
Thank you.
I was really moved by the email with your daughter.
Right.
And I just wonder, I'm 10 years older than you are.
Yes.
You know, how you keep yourself, your own practice, how you keep optimistic, how you keep your own sense of positive energy. I mean, what have you learned along the way in terms of keeping your own capacities and strength
Sure.
intact?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like, I guess, any other activity, Jane, you have to work on it. As I described, it's a journey, not a destination. I read a lot, and so I read a lot on organizational effectiveness and positive or psychology and the like. In fact, I'm going to take out, I forgot the name of the book that I recently read that was terrific on that. You also have to have engagement with people who are of like mind, I would say. That it's very important. It's almost, I guess, like, again, this is not a religious comment here. It's not intended to be, but you have to go to church, once a week or once a month just to keep the saw sharp. And I think it's important to have a group of individuals who are of like mind to share ideas and the like. So that would be another area that I would suggest that we focus in on. Up the Mood Elevator it was a fairly quick read that I read that just helps you, from a leadership perspective, but even from a lay perspective, to be even more effective here. So those are a couple. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.